Not personal, Zara. It's just smarter business to cut the dead weight before we scale. Vincent's voice was smooth, a polished river stone in the noisy elegance of the restaurant. The sound that froze the moment wasn't his words, but the delicate, self-satisfied clink of his champagne flute against his front teeth. The light from the crystal chandelier above our table caught in the glass, a tiny, blinding star. You should have read the bylaws more carefully, Vincent. I met him at a tech incubator in Austin, a place humming with forced innovation and the smell of stale coffee. He was the golden boy, all charisma and a sharp jawline, pitching a revolutionary logistics algorithm he couldn't actually build. I was the quiet coder in the corner who had already built it. We were a perfect partnership on paper. He was the face, I was the engine. Our first real memory together wasn't a celebration, but a 3 a.m. marathon session in our cramped WeWork office, fixing a catastrophic bug before a demo for our first potential investor. D survived on lukewarm pizza and a shared six-pack of Red Bull, and when the code finally compiled, the exhausted relief felt like a victory we'd earned together. The first red flag was a small one. In that same investor meeting, he presented our slide deck and referred to the core algorithm, Helios, as something he'd conceptualized. When I brought it up later, he'd laughed it off, a dismissive wave of his hand. Just simplifying for the suits, Zara. You know how it is. I did, so I let it go. It seemed safe. The first year was our golden period. We secured a respectable seed round, and Vincent was brilliant. He wooed clients, charmed venture capitalists, and got our startup's name in all the right tech journals. I lived in the code, refining Helios, making it faster, smarter, more elegant. My world was the quiet hum of servers and the glow of a dual-monitor setup. His was a blur of airport lounges, steak dinners at Per Se, and Hermes ties. I saw the expense reports. I rationalized them as the cost of doing business, the price of the ambition I supposedly lacked. He was giving his all, I told myself. I was just giving my work. The imbalance grew so slowly I barely noticed. He started referring to the company as his vision. He'd bring in new hires without consulting me, junior developers who would ask me questions about my own architecture, explaining that Vincent had given them a different directive. Each time I'd correct the course, smooth over the disruption, and tell myself that a good partner trusts the other to manage their side of the business. The discovery came not with a bang, but a flicker. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was running a routine code integrity scan, something I did every few weeks. A block of code flagged an anomaly. It was structured inefficiently, crudely. It wasn't mine. I ran a deeper diagnostic, a digital forensics tool I'd built myself. Scan revealed hundreds of such blocks, woven expertly into the deepest layers of Helios. Using a reverse lookup on a few snippets, I found their source, a restricted license open-source project from a European university. Using it in a commercial product was a blatant copyright violation. But the horror was deeper than that. This wasn't a shortcut, it was sabotage. He had deliberately contaminated my clean, proprietary code with stolen work. It was a poison pill. In any future dispute, I would never be able to prove which parts of the algorithm were mine. My life's work was now legally inseparable from his theft. The investigation took 3 weeks of sleepless nights. I used the server's administrative access logs, which I alone controlled, to trace the file modifications. The changes were all made from the IP address of a junior developer, Theo, but during hours when Vincent's keycard had badged him into the office. The final piece was an old keylogger I'd installed on the main server for security months prior. I found the chat logs between them on Slack. Vincent's words were clear. Just weave it in. She'll never spot it, and it makes the core inseparable if things get messy. The breaking point was that dinner. He'd called it a meeting to clear the air. He'd already held an all-hands meeting without me, announcing he'd secured a $15 million Series A funding round. The catch? The funding was for a new corporation he'd registered a month earlier. It was migrating our client contracts, our staff, everything but me. The dinner was his victory lap performed for an audience. Our 2 original seed investors, the Waltons, were seated at a table not 10 feet away, watching. That's when he delivered his monologue. Look, you're a brilliant coder, but you're not a founder. You don't have the stomach for this. I built the brand, the relationships. The code is just a commodity. Anyone could have written it. My world went silent. Clatter of the restaurant, the murmur of the Waltons, conversation, it all faded. In that crystalline silence, the entire plan unfolded in my mind, a perfect, logical schematic. And I noticed a tiny, overlooked detail that would become his undoing. As the waiter brought the check, Vincent paid for our exorbitantly expensive meal not with his personal card, but with the glossy new American Express black card issued to his new company. I was already using investor money to celebrate my execution. My first call was to Ms. Tanaka, a notoriously sharp intellectual property lawyer whose online bio was as intimidating as her hourly rate. We met every Tuesday for 2 months in her sterile, minimalist office. The legal fees climbed past $87,000, draining my savings and forcing me to sell a block of my old tech stock. The process was a meticulous, draining marathon. Tanaka was my strategist, translating my rage into cold, legal leverage. We had one close call. Vincent's new corporate lawyers sent a blustering cease and desist letter, accusing me of attempting to steal company assets. For a terrifying 24 hours, I thought he knew what I was planning. But Tanaka calmly dissected it as a standard intimidation tactic, a predator puffing up its chest. Our case was built on a foundation of irrefutable digital proof. He had 117 timestamped code, commits from my personal, off-site Git repository, proving my sole authorship of the original Helios algorithm. We had the server logs showing Vincent's and Theo's IP addresses accessing the contaminated code libraries. We had the Slack logs. We had an email from Vincent to Theo instructing him to make the core inseparable. The final, ironic piece of evidence came from the open-source project he'd stolen from. Lead developer was a woman I had mentored years ago at a hackathon. She was more than happy to provide a sworn affidavit confirming the code's origin and its restrictive licensing terms. The legal trap was the decoy. We didn't file a public lawsuit. We filed for private, binding arbitration, citing a clause in our partnership agreement. And my initial claim was deceptively modest. A simple buyout of my shares, valued at $150,000. Looked like I was rolling over. Vincent, eager to avoid a public fight that could spook his new investors, agreed immediately. He walked into the trap willingly. The arbitration hearing was held in a soulless conference room with gray walls and a long mahogany table. Vincent sat opposite me, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he was sculpted from Smarm. Vincent looked bored, checking his Patek Philippe watch. My opening statement, delivered by Ms. Tanaka, was calm and brief. We are here because Mr. Valenti believes my client's work is a commodity. Vincent smirked. His lawyer launched into a patronizing speech about the natural evolution of startups. Tanaka let him finish, her hands steepled on the table. Then she began. First, she presented the evidence for the simple buyout claim. Vincent's lawyer was already preparing his lowball counteroffer. And now, she said, her voice dropping a register, we will address the matters of fraudulent conversion, conspiracy, and felony intellectual property theft. She laid out the evidence in two waves. First, the proof of my sole creation of Helios. Then, the killer proof, the server logs, the Slack messages, the affidavit, the email. Finally, she produced the American Express statement for Vincent's new company, showing the charge from the restaurant. The arbitrator, a retired federal judge, leaned forward, his expression changing from passive interest to steel. Vincent's face went from a confident tan to the color of ash. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the bravado evaporating like mist. It's not personal, Vincent, I said quietly across the table. It's just business. The fallout was a beautiful, cascading collapse. The arbitrator's decision came down in 48 hours. It was brutal. He didn't just dissolve our partnership. He awarded 100% of the Helios intellectual property to me, citing Vincent's malicious and fraudulent conduct. Vincent was held personally liable for my entire $87,000 legal bill, plus an additional $250,000 in punitive damages. Ms. Tanaka forwarded the ruling to his new investors. They invoked the fraud clause in their term sheet and rescinded the entire $15 million funding round. The tech blogs caught the scent of blood. Within a week, visionary founder ousted in IP theft scandal was the headline on 3 major sites. The Waltons, our first believers, sent me a single, supportive text. I never replied to the dozens of panicked calls and texts from Vincent. I saw him once, about 6 months later. Not at a Michelin star restaurant, but in a LinkedIn profile picture. He was now a strategic growth consultant, a title that means you're unemployed. Heard through the grapevine he'd sold his downtown condo to pay the damages. I never rebuilt the company. Instead, I licensed the Helios algorithm to a major software firm in a 7-figure deal that came with a consulting contract. I work from a quiet loft in a city by the ocean now. My peace is my greatest luxury. Last week, I read an article about the company that acquired my tech. The CEO was quoted, praising the algorithm's elegant design. The architecture is so brilliant, he said, it's completely inseparable from the product's success. I closed my laptop and looked out at the water. He was right about one thing, the code was inseparable. It was just inseparable from me.